Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today it was a choice. I've had a couple of viewer requests to go through a few things. I might end up doing both, but one of them was obviously the Rupert Lowe interview over at the Lotus Eaters. However, I heard from other people that basically it was quite boring with just a lot of platitudes, with not much more to say on that interview than has already been said. So instead I'm going with another viewer recommended video, which is obviously going through what Times Radio had to say about Homeland. Now I only find this a lot more interesting because I want to see how the mainstream media effectively still deal with the far right, the radical areas of the online right, things like that. You know what I mean. And I'm quite happy describing them as this. If you want more details on what Homeland is actually all about, I covered their rather large implosion a couple of weeks back. Long story short on that, the members were not happy with the leadership ignoring their pleas to not have a recent femboy who had a particular fetish for black men to be leader of a party that is supposedly going to remigrate all black men. That is policy that I am obviously not for either. I have black friends. But due to the leadership effectively calling some of the membership, probably a large part of it to be honest, they only have 1,000 members, and most of them are on Twitter, effectively bad actors and wanting to sink the party, it ended up with people like Steve Laws having to leave, and then a week later, yapper of nonsense Pete North left. If all these names mean nothing to you, please just watch the other video, link down the description. It's probably required watching for what I'm going to say in this video. But anyway, there's a lot to get through, so let's just get into it. Take it away, Times Radio.
I do actually find that disgusting, that in this land, the home of the English, there are classrooms with no English people in.
Do you think that's where
remigration, yes I do. I think that's where remigration will help this country.
Yeah, I think this interaction is going to pretty much sum up the entire video, so I can see why they put it at the front. Effectively, a complaint that I've heard plenty of normies have, and actually was a big complaint about immigration, which is, well, look at these classrooms for this particular example where there's barely any room for English children. That seems to be a very good reason to dial down the amount of immigrants we've been taking in. Perfectly reasonable. Half the reason Brexit happened, really. And here we have the Chimes journalist saying, do you think that's in line with your code of conduct? The issue comes in is that Homeland, they make the dog whistles either too obvious or they just do away with the dog whistle completely and just go full-blown I hate other races. I've seen it happen plenty of times, and not only that, but usually whenever I get in an argument with a Homelander, I will get called Jewish at some point. Which is probably part of the reason that the Times titled this Inside Britain's Biggest Fascist and Neo-Nazi Party. Because I'm not being funny, I've literally only ever been called a Jew by, if not neo-Nazis, Nazi sympathisers, which are basically just closeted neo-Nazis anyway. So believe it or not, don't actually have much of an issue with the title. I try and dial down the rhetoric my way, because if you just call these people Nazis, they tend not to really care what you have to say, so I call them ethno-nationalists. But yeah, I've really got no problem calling them a party, at least a party with neo-Nazis in it.
You get a lot of young people who do not feel represented. That is why they're here. That is why that we're looking for alternatives to the mainstream, because we feel that that represents us. We feel like our future is in the wrong hands.
Another funny thing that I think we're going to constantly see is that a lot of the rhetoric is effectively going to be aped off reform. Because to be honest, this rhetoric has been quite common for, well, quite some time. It was a big rhetoric of Brexit. And another thing I'm going to mention is that while it may be the same rhetoric, it is quite clear that Homeland wants to differentiate themselves from reform somehow. And as we'll go through, the way they want to do it is be more hardline on immigration with their remigration and mass deportation magic words. What that's actually ended up doing is that it's made them not really get anywhere. And so over time, while they've had cranks in who've wanted to push it even further, I'm talking about Steve Laws, what their plan has been, and I go through this in the last video, is to push the rhetoric basically more to the political centre. In other words, get closer to reform's position. And I've been saying this for months now. Everyone's plan is effectively just to coalesce all your positions on immigration to what reforms already was for years. So why not just vote reform at that point?
You are being ignored by politics, and your community is slipping away.
This is the Homeland Party, described as being the largest fascist neo-Nazi party in the UK by the campaign group Hope Not Hate.
Well, in retrospective, that's going to put me saying I'm happy to call them neo-Nazis in another light, isn't it? Hope Not Hate is indeed bad. They are bad because effectively they will find one of their enemies and then work backwards from the accusation of calling them fascist or a Nazi or something like that. Or a racist as well. They were calling Priti Patel a racist for ages because of some of her rhetoric, despite the fact that she let in the most immigrants into Britain literally ever. However, a problem people have then is because Hope Not Hate will do things like this, they will assume they lie about everyone. That's not quite how Hope Not Hate works. For Hope Not Hate to be somewhat successful, and I say this all the time about propagandists, they have to be correct something like 60% of the time. It's a number I've plucked from thin air, but the point is, they do have to be somewhat factual. And the problem that a lot of people, especially in the online right, run into is that, oh, I've seen that Hope Not Hate have said something on this, therefore I will believe the opposite, which just turns you into a counter NPC. But the fact of the matter is that Hope Not Hate do actually do work into actual fascist organisations and find actual fascism. I've actually seen them do somewhat of a decent job on that with places like Patriotic Alternative and Generation Identity, and so far with what the Times have been working with here, you know, I've not seen any particular reason to call them neo-Nazis or fascists. I will give them that. I, however, would still call them that, as I say, because of my constant interactions with all of them, which I have gone through again in the last video.
The party is accused of being embedded in the Great Replacement, a theory that the white race is being replaced, which has been identified as being a conspiracy by the government.
Yeah, so this is the thing with the Great Replacement. It has effectively always been given a completely you're not allowed to talk about this category, effectively because of the Christchurch shooting, because the man who did that was obviously a believer in said conspiracy. And the main issue with the conspiracy isn't necessarily that high immigration, low native birth rates, whatever, means that demographics are changing. That part's all true. The issue comes in when you say it's effectively, oh, it's a plan by the UN and world governments and things like that. And then quite quickly that turns into, effectively, the Jews are doing this to us. That's where the issue comes in with the Great Replacement. You can talk about demographics. Hell, every other right-winger who isn't a wet talks about demographics to some degree. You just have to be smart about it, and going on about the Great Replacement, not exactly smart.
Leading members have been previously affiliated with groups like Patriotic Alternative and the British National Party.
Yeah, BNP this might not apply so much to, but if you were part of Patriotic Alternative, I mean, the amount of reading I did into them, again, it's similar to Homeland. Their front was very, oh, we just care about demographics, immigration and family. You dig into it to any extent, and I may as well play the clip again. So when asked which book he would like to preserve for all future generations to read, this was Mark Collette, the leader of Patriotic Alternative's answer.
I'd say out of all the books that I've read, there's 3 books. One by a certain misunderstood Austrian painter, that is rather marvellous. One by George Lincoln Rockwell, that if I probably say on this show, it'll be banned. And Dr. David Duke's My Awakening.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that clip's about 4 years old and it still never gets old. And while you can say, oh, well, this was a breakaway party, you know, you can't say that this party is affiliated with Patriotic Alternative. Yeah, well, I actually can when, again, this happened 4 or 5 years ago. And the reason people like Kenny Smith say the leader of Homeland Party left was nothing to do with that, but all to do with mishandling of money. Implying to me that they are fine to stand by a leader that says Mein Kampf is the best book ever and should be saved for future generations. Yet again, I don't really have an issue with calling Homeland fascist or neo-Nazi.
But Homeland says they're not far right. They're sensible nationalists, helping young people move away from extremism towards a more constructive path.
Yeah, again, with my own experience with Homelanders, that isn't happening. It's just like with Generation Identity and Patriotic Alternative, it's the same arguments regurgitated over and over again, and at some point I get called a Jew. It's in no way an improvement as far as I can tell. They're just putting a slightly more professional coat of paint on all this.
I first found out about the Homeland Party on X. When we had that big fallout between the MP Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage, my X feed was full of accounts saying how reform was too soft and actually people should go and join the Homeland Party instead.
This, to some extent, and I do mean this, is hilarious. What this is effectively saying to me is that Rupert Lowe has a whole bunch of cranks who are happy to join a fascist and neo-Nazi party, after a split with Nigel Farage because they think Nigel Farage is too soft, and that's effectively part of Rupert Lowe's criticism. Now, it would be, of course, completely absurd to say that all of Rupert Lowe's followers are fascists and neo-Nazis. Hell, Rupert Lowe has even had to throw out a couple of tweets softening his position to what Homelanders thought he actually wanted. Rupert Lowe, from what I can tell, is not a racist, he has absolutely no interest in fascism. He's effectively just a man who is chasing Twitter likes and retweets. And yes, I do mean that. The unfortunate thing is that, Twitter has a lot more people who are being a lot more open about this since Elon Musk. For all the net good he's done, there has absolutely been an uptick that I've noticed of people, being openly anti-Semitic for a start. As I say, I get called the Jew all the time. I might as well say at this point, I'm not Jewish, I'm Roman Catholic. And if you're the type that cares about race, I'm also Scottish. I'm not Scottish, I am English, but DNA test says otherwise. However, it is quite funny how accidentally pro-reform this entire section is turning into, because effectively it's saying, well, this party's full of cranks. They all moved over to here after it turned out Reform didn't want them. Let's go and see what the people who think Reform are too left-wing want. And with some of the pamphlets we've seen and things like that, it's literally playing straight into how the mainstream media attack you. This is where Reform are much better on all this, because while Reform do want a massive reduction in immigration, they're not stupid enough to keep giving them ammo. Homelanders literally cannot help themselves, because for some reason they think being hard against the mainstream media is the winning strategy. That's not quite how it works.
While the Homeland Party is a relatively small political party, with around 1,300 members and a handful of parish councillors, their leader claims that the party has grown 5 times in size since September last year.
Yeah, it's quite funny. Homeland were massively celebrating that fact, while Reform were celebrating something like 220,000 members joining, and that was after the Rupert Lowe thing. The Rupert Lowe thing that was supposed to make Reform crash and burn didn't happen. I'm also interested to see what the membership numbers for Homeland are now, because they lost quite a few members over that whole Northern Ireland debacle. And not only that, but three of the main reasons they got so big, which is obviously Steve Law's yapper of nonsense, Pete North, and Zuma Historian, who has an awful lot of videos revising World War II history, we'll say. Again, that type of thing that apparently Homelanders don't like when you point out, oh, that's what a lot of Nazi sympathisers do. So it's kind of no wonder the mainstream are calling you this. It's not just Hope Not Hate, it's pretty much everyone.
And this is causing concern for Hope Not Hate, as the campaign group is very clear what they think the Homeland Party is.
So the Homeland Party is, currently now Britain's largest and most active neo-Nazi political party or organisation.
Again, might surprise people, I'm not entirely against this framing. When Connor Tomlinson was effectively throwing out similar concerns that I have gone through in this video already, it was clearly Pete North. He did a massive reply through the Homeland Party's official Twitter, and one of the things obviously brought up was, actually my clip from the video that I did ages ago about the Mein Kampf thing. And in this entire rebuttal of stop guilting us by association, they couldn't even score the free goal of Hitler bad, which I do find quite astonishing, because Pete North, for all his faults, actually does think Hitler bad. And so if you can't even score that obvious and open free goal that basically everyone would take, what am I supposed to take from that other than, if nothing else, clearly they don't get the optics of all that side of things anyway. So you're kind of asking to be framed like this. And I really don't care that it's Hope Not Hate doing it. If they're being accurate, they're being accurate.
It registered as a political party in 2024, but it actually split away as a splinter group from an existing neo-Nazi group called Patriotic Alternative back in April 2023.
Again, as I've already gone through, this is an accurate categorisation of Patriotic Alternative. Look, I think the punishment on Sam Mellier was quite harsh. I don't think there's anyone that's been done for graffiti quite in the way he was, and conspiracy to graffiti. But listen, if you've got a Hitler poster in your garage and have an obsessive interest with Oswald Mosley, yeah, you're obviously going to get called a fascist. It's not just a smear, it's accurate.
Hope Not Hate has been documenting several of Homeland's key members' previous links to far-right organisations. But for the Homeland Party's leader, Kenny Smith, who previously held roles in Patriotic Alternative and the British National Party, he claims Homeland is far removed from these far-right groups.
Well, yeah, you're obviously going to have to say that. Oh, yeah, no, they're related to the BNP and Patriotic Alternative, those two organisations that are dying a death. because everyone found out it was full of neo-Nazis. Of course the neo-Nazis didn't follow us. Yeah, unfortunately, as I say, in my experience with them, not quite the case.
In order to be registered under the Electoral Commission in the UK, political parties must abide by UK equalities laws, which protect against discrimination of protected characteristics, including race.
I mean, obviously get rid of the Equality Act. It's a pretty ridiculous piece of legislation as it is. But one very funny thing about the Equality Act becoming law was that it's actually what ended up killing the BNP. They got into a whole load of legal trouble effectively because they kept breaking equality law. Because obviously, they didn't want non-white people in there, did they? And Homeland have had to throw out a few statements onto Twitter effectively saying, oh, of course, anyone can join the party, we don't discriminate. And then the membership splits in half because, well, a gay femboy wasn't technically he was discriminating on who he'd want to sleep with. It just so happened to be the type of people that a lot of the membership wanted to discriminate against.
Explicitly saying that they're fascist or neo-Nazi turns people off still in the UK. And so what they do is they present themselves, as you say, they call themselves sensible nationalists. They code their language.
That's what I mean about the hope not hate, by the way. They attack people in, say, Reform and Tories, and usually they have to smear them with really, really weak pieces of evidence. But from everything I've seen of the Homeland Party, this is all just correct. Yeah, you obviously are not going to want to be called fascist and all that, because as much as you would like these smears not to work, and I'm sure quite a few of them would probably like to embrace it, I know some people that do, it's not going to get you anywhere close to power, which is why you have to, well, as he says, code your language. What does remigration mean? Well, on the face of it, it's simple things like removing the pull factors and making push factors for immigrants that aren't too icky for the electorate, I guess we'll say. Things like welfare should only be for British nationals, make it harder to employ foreigners in the UK, things like that. Actually applying the law equally would also be a big help. Unfortunately, Steve Laws ruins this every time, because even when they were trying to be sensible nationalists, he was saying things like Step 7, which is, just force the rest of them out if the push and pull factors aren't enough. Who's the rest of them, Steve? Oh, it's non-native Brits. It's not even non-native Brits, it's just white people. And they're pan-Europeans, which is something that is not talked about enough here. Again, Zuma Historian, one of the biggest people who was in the Homeland Party, he has a Latvian wife. It's not about the genetics of northwestern Europe, it's just about white versus everyone else. That's all they care about, and it's really boring.
The reality, of course, if you look at both its membership and its ideology, it sits very comfortably within any definition of fascist and in neo-Nazi.
I need details of that. I think they've been smart enough to have the facade actually go a bit into their back end, if you know what I mean. You look at their actual principles and their actual policy and things like that. They try and effectively quiet down what Steve Laws wants and try and up what Reform are already pushing for anyway, let's say.
I mean, when you go through the Homeland website, it looks relatively inoffensive. You've got videos of people litter picking, leafleting, the sort of thing you'd expect from a political party.
Yeah, and if that's all they did, I'd be happy with it. That's good stuff to do. Do litter pick, do clean up graffiti. That's good stuff. Unfortunately, your core ideology, as I agree with even the hope not hate guy, is absolutely ludicrous.
The Homeland Party states that to tackle immigration, they would introduce remigration, which involves reversing laws and policies that permit and encourage mass immigration, while implementing those which encourage mass emigration.
Yeah, this is what I mean about the facade going further into their back end. This policy in and of itself isn't particularly unreasonable, if you ask me. I may find details that they actually go into of this particular policy somewhat abhorrent, but on the face of it, yes, to reduce migration, do get rid of pull factors. Do put more push factors in. As far as I'm concerned, Reform are well on the way to having a sensible policy of that will either get us to net zero immigration or even net emigration. The Swedes have done it, why can't we? We've probably had a worse time than them.
Prioritising the removal of criminals who harm society.
Which is not only Reform policy, that's now also something the Tories are really trying to push. And even Keir Starmer's I think he's gone beyond hinting at it. I think he's even said, yeah, criminals need to be deported. So it is an interesting one. But I suppose this is their point. They're trying to mask what they really want. And unfortunately, Steve Laws is pretty dire at actually hiding what he really wants. Hence, I suppose, he felt like he had to leave.
Joe considers Homeland's policy to have a different meaning.
Remigration is about removing or creating the climate whereby people of colour and minority communities leave the country.
Well, it kind of goes beyond that, to be honest. I don't think that's the greatest phrasing of it ever. Because what it's trying to mask is, yeah, they want all minorities gone. But with all these enclaves that we know about, and, it bubbled up over in, say, places like Hare Hills and Leicester, obviously, a couple of years ago. It's a classic argument against immigration where if you do have mass immigration and you do make these communities where, even the Daily Mail had a report the other day where there's communities where people don't even bother to speak English, even though most of them know English, because it's one of these enclaves of, well, foreigners. And it is actually quite a popular position to effectively, in some way, encourage these communities to, well, move. Because one thing the English have really appreciated and absolutely not taken for granted over centuries is that effectively everyone speaks pretty much the same language. Obviously you've got regional accents and slang, and I can barely understand people from the northeast. But phrasing it like, oh, they want communities to go, that's probably a popular position. Where they go even further is that they want fully integrated people to go as well. That's where the issue lies. But obviously with Hope Not Hate, it's full of communists, so this is where their influence into, say, the Times is made particularly clear, and is a large reason Reform are doing absolutely smashingly in the polls, because they agree that these foreign communities that don't speak English haven't integrated, and, well, something has to be done about them, encouraging them in some way to move to a country where the language they do speak regularly is the main language. That probably isn't a bad idea.
And so rather than immigration or migration, it is remigration, as in forcing them to leave.
That's where the other issue comes in, the forcing them to leave. The only people that the general population are comfortable forcing to remove from the country are illegal immigrants and criminals, which, to be honest, illegal immigrants are criminals anyway. And as we saw from Steve Laws before, he wants to go beyond that, to all non-white people. So it's pointless to even engage with someone like that because it's ridiculous.
Their core beliefs are around what they call remigration and the Great Replacement, but ostensibly at its core, this is a party that wants to reduce or even remove non-white and people of colour from the United Kingdom.
Yeah, again, it's a little bit of slippery sleight of hand with the Hope Not Hate guy here. It's effectively trying to almost rephrase Homeland's wants to be similar to that of Reform's, because obviously if you're going to be reducing migration, to some extent you are going to be reducing the amount of people of colour in the country, and possibly even, being in a state of net emigration. The issue comes in is that they are effectively not very good at hiding that actually, yes, they do pretty much want all people of colour removed, which is not what most people want in Britain. Well, I think the statistic, something like 80-something% of people think you don't need to be white to be British. Clearly, race really does not come that much into people's thinking. But Hope Not Hate really want it to seem like that, it's Reform as well as Homeland that are on the racial thinking. It's a sneaky sleight of hand, but I noticed it.
The Homeland Party's own code of conduct, it states that there are restrictions on expressions of hatred towards someone or a group of people on account of factors such as race, nationality, ethnic or national origin, as well as the use of racial slurs at their events and online.
Well, I've been called a Jew quite a lot by a lot of their members online, so not exactly great, is it? But I'm no snitch, so I don't really care. But it won't be hard to find. If they find the correct threads, it won't be hard to find Homeland members. Maybe not saying necessarily the worst racial slurs, but certainly doing things that obviously break the Equality Act, I'll put it that way.
I've passed through 6 checkpoints this week alone without any issue because I don't act like an idiot online.
That's pretty much been my advice to Homelanders. Stop being like this. I'd also probably stop doing things like saying Disraeli wasn't British or effectively groping right-wingers. To some extent it can work. We saw it work with Charlie Kirk, sure. But almost everyone is wise to it now, and you've got to a point where, sure, you're making James Lindsay come off like an idiot sometimes. Again, this isn't you, this is more mainstream people on the American right. But the English and British just seem a hell of a lot more inoculated against that sort of nonsense. So, say what you like about Kenny Smith, but he is correct. You do need to be more sensible. Otherwise you will just basically stay irrelevant, and as much as everyone's pivoting toward a more let's deport people mentality, that is pretty much entirely down to Reform. It's very little bit has to do with Homeland, if any.
But when I go through a lot of the X accounts of Homeland members and supporters, it seems to paint a different picture.
I've always been disgusted by mixed race couples. and race mixing in general.
Yeah, this, and then there was another one where I think it was the digital media manager or something like that was saying if you like football, you're actually a bit of a race traitor. Just these are not normal people, and I know the replies are always, oh, they call JD Vance weird. JD Vance is in a mixed race marriage. Yes, you are weird.
I mean, I'm just watching a video now of this guy. He's apparently 16, and he's just called mixed race couples disgusting. This guy also looks incredibly young. He's talking about the great replacement theory.
Yeah, this is another thing that seems absolutely true about Homeland. They always try and spin it like, oh, we've got really active young people who are really interested in nationalism and the future of their country and what have you. And it's putting ideas in their head that I find particularly distasteful. And obviously, if I find it distasteful, my God, the Times are going to find it distasteful, aren't they?
So I want to find out what's really going on inside the Homeland Party and if they are capitalising on the fallout of Reform UK.
I think the funniest thing in retrospect of watching this is all of these interviews and everything like that will have been done, it was like a week after the Homeland fallout. And I think it was only like a week after Reform absolutely trounced the local election. So it's very odd to say, oh, have they done well in this fallout of Reform? And even by this point, everyone was saying, what fallout? Who cares? You know, this week Rupert Lowe's gone on another let's go around the media to attack Reform again, and Reform went up 1% in the latest YouGov poll. You know, nobody cares. There's no fallout. If anything, they're better than ever. And in fact, it's Homeland who seem to have collapsed, losing some of their most high-profile activists. I wonder if they're going to mention that.
To attend the Homeland conference, they required us to sign a Memorandum of Understanding, which included rules of no secret recordings and to only film in designated filming zones.
Yeah, that's fine and pretty typical. It's no secret that people act different when they're on and off camera. The implication here is obviously to say there's almost designated be racist areas where there's going to be no cameras. Honestly, at a conference like that, I think people would be more behaved than they are on Twitter anyway, so what's the point?
I've attended numerous party conferences in my time and have never been asked to sign a document like this.
I suppose on that point I'm thinking of more private meetings, and I don't just mean with like Reform, I mean with the Tory party when I was part of the Tories as well. It was quite normal to be asked not to photograph or video private meetings, but at a conference, yeah, completely different. It's supposed to be as public as possible. So even at the odd conference I've been to, I've never been asked to sign anything like that either, but whether it's just for journalists or not, I don't know. I don't see why it would be. But yeah, it's not exactly helping Homeland's look. Although a lot of people like it. Oh, I've got to be super secret because the state's out to get me. No, not really. We just think you're idiots.
When we arrived at the conference, we were greeted by a Homeland member who said that they were there to babysit us for the entire event. I wanted to gain a feel from attendees at the conference of what they thought of Reform UK and the Homeland Party. And as per the memorandum, I had to let individuals come to me.
Yeah, again, this is pretty odd. I get what Homeland's going for here. It's more of a, we want to be very controlled of what the media can see here so they can't easily smear us. Unfortunately, just by doing this alone, it makes it really easy to smear you. And it's one of those things, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. You know, you compare this to a Reform conference where they'll just happily take questions from anyone and everyone, and they can film whatever they want. It's completely different. Completely different.
Why are you part of the Homeland Party?
So originally I joined Reform, but I became quickly disillusioned when they started slipping from their original message into a more populist message, just trying to bring in numbers, and they started to lose sight of what their original message was.
Yeah, I'm going to hear an awful lot of arguments that I've been through hundreds of times before again, aren't I? Reform didn't go back on their messaging. That's all I need to say there. This is people who hype themselves up thinking, effectively, the Reform Party was some anti-Islamist, get rid of all the foreigners party, which has never been the case, and I don't know why people are pretending it never was.
So then I went on a bit of a soul-searching mission. It took me a few months, and then I decided on the Homeland Party because they were the only one who I really saw were genuine in their message of standing for our people.
I get the feeling an awful lot of the answers are going to be pretty much the same as this, so let's just look for the interesting ones.
I was supposedly the face of your conservatism, and I didn't feel represented. You get a lot of young people, Zoomers, I'm technically a Zoomer, who feel that way, who do not feel represented.
Yeah, the problem with an awful lot of these people is, and I know the type they're going to be, because I knew people like this, basically. I was not quite in this level of, rejected from society, let's say. This cohort of young men that had basically no friends was avoided by an awful lot of people and effectively struggles to socialise basically in your average circles, I guess we'll call them. And so they find ones on the internet, and I'm not being funny, an awful lot of these circles, effectively it does become a competition of who can say the most based and red-pilled thing, if you catch my drift, and that's why an awful lot of them make memes and go on about, oh, Homeland Party, you're all being deported. Steve Laws falls into this. At least Steve Laws has a wife and kids, though, I suppose. But that will, to some extent, inspire these younger people. And I know what the classic thing is, oh, you're just calling them incels. Well, I've not called them that name, but there is definitely an issue with male loneliness, and when it comes to that sort of thing, they basically either go far left or far right. That just seems to be what happens, and either way, from the looks of it, they become femboys, so they're pretty screwed either way. And so it's kind of no wonder that these people with fringe opinions don't feel represented by mainstream parties and so go to a fringe party. It's kind of no wonder with that.
Immigration is not just a problem with illegal immigration. We need comprehensive policies to address all of it.
Oh, that's Pete North. That's a yapper of nonsense. I'm not having... I can't be bothered covering it. Yes, you need full-on comprehensive policies, and you've attempted to write them before, and you still don't think they're good enough, so I don't care. Moving on.
What would those comprehensive policies be?
Well, remigration, obviously, we're at the remigration conference.
Mr. Yapper of Nonsense finally puts a very concise answer forward, largely because he's in an interview format, and just says remigration. Yes, I get it. Magic words. What does it mean? That's not comprehensive. You can't just say we have comprehensive policy and say remigration.
While I'd only been able to speak to a small number of people at the conference, I noticed a variation in their ideas of remigration.
It's amazing, really, isn't it? You see more consistency from Reform, who apparently are throwing around what they mean when they say deport illegals, deport criminals, bring down legal migration to net zero. Apparently that's all over the place compared to Homeland anyway.
Hello, just a quick one on remigration. We often talk about African remigration and Asiatic remigration, but what about Semitic remigration?
Oh dear. The mask slipped, the time's found out. What would you expect from saying something like this? It's all so tedious. I've covered 3 different groups now that had this same problem, who are like, we're all for immigration, and then they can't help but bring up the Jews. It's so tedious.
How many people would that be, though?
I do not have the figures in front of me, but look at all the people that are non-natives here that are on benefits. As an example, I think there's around 1.5, maybe 2 million people.
Okay, first part of this, pretty bad, I'm not going to lie. The problem people have is that when you say natives and things like that, they think, oh, it sounds a bit too Aryan mid-century German for me. That is genuinely what a lot of people think. And saying non-native on benefits, that also puts people off because they think, oh, there's people who've been here all their lives who've paid into the system. They probably deserve benefits, or their kids deserve benefits at some point. I'm just explaining how the normie thinks here. I'm not making a moral judgment. Whereas to basically say the exact same thing, or almost the exact same thing, Matt Goodwin frames it as British national versus non-British national, because that's a hell of a lot more palatable than going on, about genetics and things like that. Things that invoke the thought of, eugenics or, well, as I keep saying, Nazis. So yeah, optics do matter, and anyone who keeps saying I'm an optics cook or anything like that, or you only care about optics, yeah, elections are largely won on optics, so I'd probably start thinking about that. Why do you think your own leader is telling you to stop being an idiot online? It's because the optics of the party matter.
There's more white people on benefits than non-white people, though, isn't there?
That's very true. But why are they on benefits? They're on benefits possibly because we don't have a system that supports them. Maybe that system that supports them would have jobs there if it wasn't taken up by non-natives.
Again, an answer that's almost there, but the big problem is the framing of natives and non-natives, but ultimately this is the problem they have with Reform. Long story short, they're not racist enough. If anything, this is making Reform come off as remarkably sensible, and I don't think that's what the Times are trying to do here. I think Homeland are just that incapable.
We would be looking at drawing down entitlements to housing, education, health, for foreign-born people who've just basically arrived here to exploit the economic opportunities that Britain has to offer.
That is more or less what Reform are going for, by the way. I especially in their rhetoric, but the most explicit thing I think I've ever found is within their housing policy in their contract. Effectively, it said foreigners at the end of the queue, British nationals first. I don't know why that wouldn't be applied to basically all benefits. So yeah, I'm not saying it's bad policy. I am saying that Pete North should definitely invest in a shirt and tie.
But when you say changes in ethnic demographics, surely in order to get that back, you'd have to get rid of people that aren't white. Is that what you believe or no?
But so this is what we're trying to show people. The white facet of our ethnicity, we didn't choose that.
This is a really weird deflection from this particular question. And I don't know why the answer isn't just yes, but that's because an awful lot of the people who have recently come here, and that very well may be legally, but have come through on policy that absolutely nobody voted for, are mostly non-white. The problem is they're looking to get the demographics pretty much to like 99 to 100% white, and they don't even necessarily mean white British, by the way. Again, Zuma historian married a Latvian. And these are really simple questions you should be expecting from the Times. I'm getting really fed up of seeing right-wingers, mostly from the online world. I mean, obviously I don't really care about Homeland. But anyway, right-wingers going onto these interviews and still not expecting these really obvious questions. I don't understand how you don't prepare for things like this. At the end of the day, an interview, to some extent, is a battle. You have to prepare for battles, and if you're not prepared, as frankly none of these people seem prepared for, then you're asking to get smeared. Guess who I think's one of the most prepared people for questions like this? Oh, Nigel Farage. Richard Tice is even pretty good. Hell, quite a few of the Tories are pretty good at it as well. But, you know, sure, some of them get media training. But my God, this just seems so simple to me. And I don't get how they keep putting themselves into situations where they can just put their foot in their mouths. Anyway, let's have a quick run through some of Kenny Smith's interview. I'm not going through everything, he's not that interesting.
If we look at Reform UK, I mean, last year they definitely took the UK by storm. They've overtaken the Conservatives in membership size now. Why don't they appeal to you?
Just for reference, this Homeland conference was on the 26th of May, so this was actually just before the absolute stomping that Reform UK committed in the local elections. I think it was just 3 days after this. And it is always interesting to see why the right wing's splitting. What's wrong with Farage? Because an awful lot of people, especially on the left wing of politics, are always really surprised to hear people say, oh, Farage doesn't go anywhere near far enough. And, well, I imagine that's what the answer will be.
Because Farage is a false prophet for me. He is not interested in people genuinely. He'd be Tory 2.0 if he could. That's it.
Well, I mean, they're in control of 10 councils now, so I suppose we'll see. But this was always a classic. Farage will be Tory 2.0. If he was just going to be Tory 2.0, why would he not just join the Tory party and support them? Oh, because he actually wants to commit to manifestos they've put out in the past. That would be why. Not sell a false promise and then ruin everyone's life with it. Again, why did he get back into politics? Because people were begging him because they wanted change, and he was the face of that change to them. I don't believe he's going to disappoint us, at the very least intentionally.
You've seen he talks tough, and he has done for years, about immigration. But as soon as he sits down in front of somebody from the mainstream media like yourselves, or some serious political commentator, they capitulate, they cave in.
It's so funny to hear this while people who are currently leaving Homeland are saying the same thing about Kenny. It's pretty much what Steve Laws said. It's actually hilarious that literally about a week before this conference, Steve Laws left citing, oh, they're going soft, just for Kenny to then say, oh, you see, when the mainstream media get involved and when they look like they're going to get somewhere, they capitulate. He's done exactly that, and he's moving directly towards what reform policy already is. It's nuts.
You know, he's telling you that remigration is impossible. That's utter nonsense.
Well, it's not going to be nonsense if you end up not actually winning anything. So at the end of the day, you have to start somewhere, as Nigel Farage famously said in that clip you're referencing.
What's remigration?
Remigration is simply about putting our people first.
Oh, get on with it. Come on. I'll see if there's anything substantive here.
The remigration will reverse that trend by allowing people to go back to their homelands and stopping demographic change. And that's absolutely important. Renaud Camus was stopped from coming to our conference today because he was highlighting the Great Replacement.
What is remigration? Sending people back to their ancestral homeland, I guess. Yeah, I know that. How are you going to do it, though? Because ultimately what ends up happening, as I say every time, is they just have the reform contract. because if they allowed their mask to slip, they'd look insane. Oh, look at Steve Laws, incredible. And yeah, great replacement stuff, it's an uphill battle. You're not going to convince people that this entire problem with immigration happened for any other reason than political expediency. Nobody's going to believe it was actually the Jews or whatever, or the UN. And yes, I know about the UN's own pamphlet on mass immigration and how it's supposed to be the way forward because birth rates are declining. Yes, I know that happened. That doesn't mean the UN officially actually ever committed to it. And from what I can tell, they haven't. They are just following the incentives within their own bubbles, which is to effectively be as progressive as possible, and that's to basically not believe in any borders. So don't go on about the Great Replacement, it makes you look a bit mad.
Last year, the leader of the House of Commons commissioned a guide to warn colleagues of 8 conspiracies, including the Great Replacement. Camus was expected to speak at the Homeland conference, but a few days prior he was banned from entering the UK as his presence was not considered to be conducive to the public good.
I mean, that's obviously ridiculous, and the Times does go in to say that Camus' opinions are not particularly anti-Semitic, but because he, uses the term the Great Replacement, it's seen as forwarding it and therefore should not be allowed into the country. As I say, pretty ridiculous. I don't see a risk of there being a mass increase in anti-Semitic crimes from people who are at the Homeland conference of all places. You're much more likely to see that on your average Saturday in London. As I've been covering as I covered for weeks actually, just after that dreadful October 7 attack. But that would be a completely demographic of people, wouldn't it? And that kind of muddies the water all over here. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very bad that the Christchurch shooter, and I think Anders Breivik are terrible people, given that they're terrorists, and I know they subscribe to the Great Replacement theory, and this is what I mean. Just, you could complain about mass immigration without making it this massive conspiracy by globalists. At the end of the day, as long as it's stopped, does it really matter who started it? I'm still in the mindset that it basically all happened because politicians kept panicking about their almighty GDP. I don't think it took the UN and globalists to force it through.
In response to that, you said that the British state has no desire to protect our heritage and identity. They don't care if we're raped, murdered, or even genocided. You talk about the truth of the Great Replacement. What is the Great Replacement theory to you?
The Great Replacement is not a theory. It's actually happening in front of our eyes. Everybody can see it. Statistics are showing that we are becoming a minority in our own country.
Yeah, again, you can talk about these things and not subscribe to the Great Replacement theory. I'm one of those people. There's obviously been mass immigration. There's obviously been quite a large short-term demographics change that is changing the face of the country and has led to nearly half of the British nationals in this country saying they feel a stranger in their own country. It's got to the point where even the Labour Party are effectively aping on the point of it. The thing is, as the Times went through, I mean, I cut bits of it out, but as it went through, the problem is that terrorists have used it as an excuse to commit terrorism, and it's kind of the linchpin of the whole thing is it's an organised replacement phenomenon, and I just do not agree that Western governments are in a position to organise this properly. With the amount of things, especially I've been looking into on, say, how we deal with illegal migration, it's clear they're just trying to do the most expedient thing possible.
Penny is right in the respect that the number of people identifying as white British in census data has declined between 2001 and 2021 in England and Wales. But overall, the white British population still remains as the majority ethnicity in the UK.
Well, yes, but there's also the whole thing of trends. There's also the whole thing of a few of our major cities, white British people are a minority. It's not exactly great for the Times to say, oh, don't worry about it. Look, in just 20 years, the non-white British population, it's doubled in terms of proportion. Well, that indicates that in another 20 years it's going to double again. That's how trends work. So it's pretty dumb to just say, oh, these people actually shouldn't have a problem whatsoever. I think anyone watching this would say, oh, wow, that's actually more than I expected. I think Homeland was saying this is basically propaganda for them, and this particular part actually seems to be.
There are many different factors that may contribute to this decline, including the way individuals choose to self-identify between censuses. For example, even though the question of ethnicity was introduced in the census of 1991, it only provided one option for white. It wasn't until 2001 when the census introduced white British and mixed ethnicity.
I wonder what happened between 1991 and 2001 to make that that change in the census occur. But either way, if you've got a comparison of white British to white British, I don't think self-identity is going to change it all that much, because typically with these statistics, if you consider yourself white Scottish, you're still considered white British.
And so these changes in definition makes collecting ethnicity data and measuring changes over time challenging.
That's probably one of the worst deflections away from demographic change I think I've ever seen in my life. You can't have immigration numbers be something like 300 odd thousand people a year and then just try and claim, oh, clearly this is challenging to get all this information because self-identity is a bit of a weird thing. Yeah, not when the ethnicity data has been largely asking the same question each census since 2001. Good grief. Well, you can see trends from that.
Hope Not Hate, they call you the biggest fascist neo-Nazi party in the UK. And
biggest fascist neo-Nazi.
And that's why I'm presenting this to
these
you
people
and say,
are clueless.
what would you be
absolutely
your response
clueless. The fact that they're calling us fascist Nazi shows you how actually retarded they are.
Oh, clean up your act. Don't say stupid things online. Say the R word straight to the Times. That's going to be a good way to do it. Again, this is what I was saying at the start. Hope Not Hate absolutely do smear people. Don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely aware that they do that. The problem is that when they do find a gold team in like Generation Identity, Patriotic Alternative, a hell of a lot of other fringe far-right groups, and now they found one in Homeland, that's where they're able to tell the truth and gain their credibility. In a lot of ways, gain their credibility back. So being a whole NPC of whatever Hope Not Hate say, I'm going to do the exact opposite of, it's a pretty stupid thing to do. And quite clearly, Homeland are not very good at whipping their members into shape, because, yeah, it's not even like Hope Not Hate have found obvious instances of, well, just ridiculous things being said by Homelanders. Even this journalist just did it flicking through her phone on the train to the remigration conference.
These are two different ideologies they've crammed into the one sentence.
Oh my god, yeah, there are nuances between fascism, the umbrella term of fascism, which can include things from Italian fascism to whatever Franco was, to the Nazis, and Nazism. Yeah, nobody cares. You were better off just saying these are baseless smears, but I'm sure there's going to be more to this.
In terms of the Great Replacement theory, it has links to xenophobia. Okay.
It shows how little people care about what Homeland's intricacies and nuances in their theories and ideology is. Nobody cares. Great Replacement isn't a theory. Okay, don't care. What do you think of the people that use it, is effectively what she's saying here. Do you want to be associated with them? Because it's so funny. Kenny is doing this weird thing where he's saying optics matter and then completely ignoring that in this interview.
It's got links to xenophobia, anti-Semitism, racism.
Words
it's a theory that is also promoted by a lot of far-right groups in the UK.
What far-right groups?
Patriotic Alternative. They
Clowns.
Oh, again, you're not going to convince anyone by saying, oh, you know anti-Semitism, you know xenophobia. Those words mean nothing. Racism means absolutely nothing. Never going to convince people with that. Reform and Farage know this. They're winning every poll now. I don't know what more you want from me. Again, optics matter, says Kenny Smith. Goes into this interview. Screw the optics, I'm going in. I can't respect people like this. It's too difficult.
Clowns.
You were part of them.
And that's why I left. Because they weren't serious individuals. There is no far-right threat in this country.
I mean, on the details of that, the interviewer probably should have had more information. He left because of the whole embezzling funds. I don't know the details, so embezzling is probably the wrong word, but mishandling of funds. Nothing about the famous clip and the many quotes that have surfaced from Mark Collette of his admiration of, Moustache Man, Hitler. And as far as I can tell, Kenny's never really disavowed that, and if we care about optics, you kind of have to do that.
Second biggest in terms of terrorism threats in the UK.
That's honestly, have you examined the data on these things? People who make tweets, people who say things out of turn, it's an absolute nonsense.
I will say, if you actually end up going through and keep a close eye on the news, it's probably every couple of months you'll actually see far-right terrorists getting actually arrested. I'm close to actually coming to terms with the fact that it's probably actually somewhat of a serious issue. I think a few years ago I wouldn't have believed it, but especially after Boris Wave and especially after the acceleration of migration that we've seen, I wouldn't be shocked if there are people falling into that. And I mean, for God's sake, Kenny, why do you care so much about optics? Because you want to be far removed from the actual terrorists on the far right. So trying to pretend that there's no threat whatsoever, again, not great. Whether it's second, though, I don't know, but it is funny to... A good thing to point out there would be, oh, well, do you know what's first? Islamism. Deflect then straight away to why is there so much of that? Migration. But no, you have to deny the fact that actually, yeah, we do actually put away far righties who have attempted terrorism. And I'm not even talking about Sam Mellier, and I'm not even sure if he counts towards far-right terrorist statistics. But I wouldn't be shocked if absolutely everyone in Homeland had their information in MI5 by now and were on a watch list. It's one of the most obvious honeypots I've seen in my life.
The biggest terror threat in this country comes from Islamists, and that's there constantly.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough improvement there. I would have just stuck to this point.
There is no far-right threat in this country.
But no, we couldn't do it. What a big issue people have with left-wing parties is a lot of them will deny that there's left-wing terrorism. You know, like, I don't know, Just Stop Oil and people like that. You know, there's been examples of them literally going into private property, factories, things like that, and just causing a massive amount of damage. Which is terrorism. Terrorism doesn't just have to be done on other people, it can be done on property as well. And a thing that people got really annoyed at the left at was denying things like, you want an even better example, things like Antifa. If you're just doing that but on the right wing, yeah, your average person is going to raise an eyebrow at the very least.
People in custody for terrorism and terrorism-connected offences in Great Britain, 62% Islamic extremist views, 30%
that's the majority.
extreme right-wing
Considering their
ideology.
size,
But it is the second biggest.
Considering their society,
It is the second biggest.
We're
and you
still the
just said
majority in this
tweets,
country.
But the second biggest.
Yeah, then going into this sort of thing, it's fine to admit it. I don't know why there's such an obsession. Like, yeah, the British state gets an awful lot of things about the far right wrong. Fine. They get a lot of things right, though. And it's honestly not as rare as you think to see in even the local newspaper, 20-odd-year-old man arrested on suspicion of plotting far-right terror attack on a mosque or something. Like, I don't think you've had one that explicit for a few months now. Last time I remember seeing was probably autumn of last year. And so trying to pretend it just doesn't happen, it's not even something you should find hard to actually concede, because you should be far enough removed from them that you can't be linked anyway. You know, a lot of left-wingers were trying to downplay it because effectively they agreed with what Antifa were doing. That's what people are going to think this time around as well.
Yep, we are still the majority in this country slightly, but the 60% of these are not the natives.
Yeah, as I said before, just a bad deflection, not going to work. You know, the statistics may well be fudged, but that doesn't particularly matter. You've not tried to claim that, so instead what you have to say is, yes, that problem is worse, and yes, I do worry about far-right terrorism, but we're not affiliated with them anyway. Trying to say it doesn't exist, it's never going to work. And then you're shown it does exist, and what's your first thing to say? Ah, yes, but think back to demographics. Yeah, but what about the 30% of these far-right terrorists? You know, are they involved with you in any way? You just say no.
Following Nigel Farage claiming that his chairman Zia Youssef had received outright racism, your Homeland Party posted on Facebook claiming that Farage was using guilt to make you accept being ruled by foreigners.
It's so funny in hindsight to all this. I've always been on the side of give Zia a chance. I've always been on the side of the man made a business, sold it for millions, seems to have known Nigel for some time, and then obviously was chosen to lead the party to a victory, which he actually managed to do after this. I even saw tweets that involved the things that Nigel Farage mentioned. I saw them happen. Again, there's no way you can say it didn't. But yeah, once again, you're not going to be a very popular person when we have had a Prime Minister of Indian heritage, and now we have a first-generation Nigerian migrant as the Tory leader. Okay, the Tory party are dying in the polls, but I think that's largely unrelated. And basically nobody cares. Nobody cares at this point in time the genetics or the complexion of the person leading the country. We are at a point where, as long as they have our interests at heart, they will be voted in. And so being on this side of, oh, you have to accept rule by foreigners, it's hilarious to watch. I think they're going to have a tough time forever if they don't realise how fringe this viewpoint is. People simply don't care anymore. Hell, I go as far as to say Victorians clearly didn't care that much. Disraeli was a second-generation Sephardic Jew, and he, in the end, was seen as the greatest British statesman pretty much of all time. And when he died, we had the Primrose League and literally 1 in 5 people in Britain was a member of said league. There's no other way to put it. They're nearly a century and a half late.
Do you think that the ethnicity of the Reform chairman is a problem?
I think it's important. I think you've seen a complete change of direction with them having a Muslim non-English chairman. 100%. And they've seen it.
I'd love to know what they'd bring up to say Nigel Farage would only have white people representing his party and that he was fully against all of Islam. It's never been the case. In fact, there was an old Brew video that I was sent the other day. I think it's called Farage versus Daftyism or something like that. And it was Nigel Farage making it clear back in, God, this was, 2016, 2017? This was after, or just after, or around the time he left UKIP, basically saying, I'm worried that UKIP are going in a direction of effectively being anti-Islam NPCs, and I think it's a bad direction. Making it clear Islamism is the problem, not Muslims full stop. And as far as I can tell, that's still his position today. Again, remarkably consistent. That's 10 years ago. So again, this whole narrative of he's softening his position, total online fantasy. Nobody thinks that apart from the internet.
There are people in that party who have been told you're not allowed to use the word homeland, you're not allowed to mention remigration. Anybody who is ever a nationalist or a patriot is kicked out.
Man, I can't see why using terms that would be associated with the Homeland Party and other people that cannot be normal people online or even in some cases real life, I can't believe they'd want to completely disassociate with that. Incredible. I don't think they've come off particularly well in all this, but I have seen some tweets from people like Kenny Smith saying, can you believe all this free advertisement? This isn't free advertisement. This is exactly what happened to Generation Identity and what happened to Patriotic Alternative. This is kind of the very thing that happens before they collapse.
You know, Rupert Lowe himself has been kicked out.
But
Ethnicity
you think
matters.
That's because of
Ethnicity matters.
Yusuf's
100%.
ethnicity?
Do you know?
I don't think Rupert Lowe got kicked out of the party for Yusuf's ethnicity. I'm going to level with you here. He was definitely told to stop using words like mass deportation, and I think he said remigration at one point as well. And I think anyone watching this would be like, wow, reform seemed really normal then. All this is going to do is make people, especially on the centre-left, feel a lot more comfortable that Reform are actually keeping in check their own members, that they don't have basically racists in their ranks, because that's what they care about. I don't know why it seems so controversial to tell the online right that people actually do not like racism, and they, to a core, find it completely disgusting, while at the same time, actually, yes, wanting much less migration. It's a thing that you'll always hear in normie conversations. I'm not racist, but migration has got out of hand. Why would that be? Because people know the rate of change of migrants coming over is absolutely a way to change the face of a country. Hence, nearly half of us now say that we feel like we're strangers in our own country. And Homeland are doing absolutely nothing to actually help that.
Would you say that it would be a problem for anyone to not be white within the Homeland Party?
No. Anybody can join this party. We've been very clear about that.
I love how he can have a whole tirade of Reform aren't actually racist enough, and then when he's directly asked about effectively legalese, he has to say, no, anyone can join, trust me. He knows for a fact the BNP got screwed over by legal processes, and he's trying to avoid that as much as he can, but he's not very good at keeping his mask on.
Would you let them onto your national council, for example?
People get onto our national council by performance. That's what we're about. We're the genuine meritocracy.
Absolutely incredible. Oh, people absolutely hate Reform because they have a foreign leader. We put out this tweet saying that foreign leaders are bad. Anyway, when it comes to us, if your performance is really good, you can join. I don't think anyone believes you. I certainly don't. But you can't say otherwise because then you get in legal trouble. It's obvious to everyone. It's so funny that he's put himself in this corner, honestly.
We have publicly documented records of several of your members who have been linked to far-right neo-Nazi groups in the past.
There are people in our party who have got a checkered history,
yeah,
and we give them a road to redemption. We are open and honest about that. I don't know what they're trying to achieve because we don't care.
Yes, but as I've mentioned before, when you have the association personally yourself with Mark Collett, and you can't bring yourself to say, yeah, I thought his Nazi simping was at the very least cringe, it does start to put question marks over a lot of people's heads, including mine. Redemption obviously should be an option for everyone. The thing is that you have this road to redemption, I then engage with members of Homeland and I get called a Jew. I don't really think it's a road to redemption. Anyway, they go into an example of someone who met Kenny Smith 4 years ago and seemed to get de-radicalised, which gives some credence to Kenny's story here. But then quickly we move on to this.
I have found one individual who's a member of the Homeland Party. He's 16 years old. He says that he's always been disgusted by mixed race couples and race mixing in general. Does that sound like an individual who's on a constructive path to you?
Yeah, that is a young man who has only recently joined our party. He's 16. You don't turn people around overnight. Everybody knows that.
Well, sure, but it's very odd that you keep attracting these people, is what I'd say. And I've had conversations with all sorts of people in the upper echelons of the team over at Homeland on Twitter, usually arguing against them, and God, I mean, is there any better example of the issues people may have with Homeland than this? Imagine my shock. Look, I see a Jewish man in a yarmulke behind me while I look like a goblin. I don't think I could have got AI to make worse optics than this. And again, it's got to be brought up. What do you expect? What type of people do you expect to be attracted to the Homeland Party with behaviour like this? No wonder he's left. This isn't acceptable, even to Kenny Smith, obviously.
While Kenny claims this person made this video prior to joining the Homeland Party, the young individual has continued posting on X.
The mosque symbolises something a little more sinister. It might be subconscious, but you can't help but be reminded of things like the Manchester bombing.
Oh my god, he's like a mini Morgoth. Armchair psychologising everyone, and making links I'm not convinced many people are making the links of subconsciously themselves. I can only imagine this gets worse.
These things are representative of the Muslim community as a whole, but Britain hasn't experienced any positive contributions from this community.
Far-right dog whistling has really gone down the drain, hasn't it? Well, let's see what the journal has to say about this anyway. Well, she goes on to ask Kenny what makes him meaningfully different to other far-right parties like Patriotic Alternative, which isn't a party but is an organisation, but you get the idea.
Well, we're not a far-right party for a start.
Okay,
we're just nationalists.
what makes you different to Patriotic Alternative, for example, which is being assessed under the definition of extremism by the government last year? What makes you different to them ideologically? That's what people will be concerned about.
It's a question I constantly ask as well, and all it seems to come down to basically is optics and we have a party. Honestly, again, I've been in arguments with these sorts of people for absolutely ages, and they never get anywhere. This is, to their credit, the furthest they've ever got, but I think Patriotic Alternative was bigger than Homeland in terms of membership. They just didn't have an official party.
Ideologically, we're not extremists. We put sensible nationalist team. We tell people what actually nationalism genuinely is. So, and that it's really literally as simple as that.
In my experience, by the way, nationalism is saying that Richard the Lionheart was a foreigner, also saying that Benjamin Disraeli wasn't British, and being called a Jew, obviously. That's another big one. Yeah, I've been doing videos on nationalism for some time now, and I'm just way more coherent than all of this. I don't think I would pretend that our national heroes are anything other than British by accident of birth.
We don't tolerate all the nonsense. The names and labels that they call us, like calling people racist, we don't just take them on as a badge of honour. We let them wash over us because they mean absolutely nothing to us.
Yeah, Generation Identity and Patriotic Alternative said the same thing. You were asked how you're different. How are you different? You can't say I'm different and then go straight to, oh, I'm actually the same thing. Come on.
In your code of conduct as well, you do state that laws and social etiquette is prohibiting certain speech, includes expressions of hatred towards persons based on their race, nationality, ethnic or national origin, and the use of racial slurs at your events and online. I've got some X posts from several of your members.
Oh boy, this ought to be good. This is going to be so hit and miss. It's going to be painful.
I've got someone saying, I don't want my children raped in return for importing delivery drivers. Still struggling to come to terms
is that racist?
I mean, I don't think the problem with that one necessarily is the racism. I think the problem with that one is how brash it is. And obviously the implication that all Deliveroo drivers, which obviously, you know, even leftists will mention how you don't really see many British national Deliveroo drivers these days. But either way, you've obviously got to be careful with your X account. You know, stuff is going to be dug up, and you can obviously just make the same point without being so brash. The problem is with Homeland is that an awful lot of them are trying to be as brash as possible, so it's no wonder you end up in situations like this. Anyway, I'm putting that on the one of the less effective tweets for making your point.
Still struggling to come to terms with the fact that an African is leader of the Conservative Party.
She is.
Well, this is where the Homeland view on how all this works differs from the prevailing zeitgeist on how all this works. As far as most people care, Kemi Badenoch married a Scotsman, Englishman, I can't remember which, and so is pretty much British, and she became leader and killed the party, but I can't. The only way you can really put an awful lot of that on her is because she's incredibly lazy, not because she is African. You know, we had Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister for, what, 2 years? Nobody cared. Life went on and the right's doing better than ever. It's a shame you can't get involved because you have no patience.
I would never send my child to a school like that, and it was regarding a picture of white, black, other minority ethnic.
And many such schools exist in this country.
Is
with
it disgusting?
not even a single English person in that school.
They said I would never send my child to a school like that. It's disgusting.
I wouldn't send my kid to a school like that either.
Is it disgusting?
That's for them. That's not a decision for me to make. That's their words.
Yeah, you're being asked about their words. Again, you've just tried to say I'm trying to de-radicalise people, and then you go straight into, partially defending what they're saying, and then when it comes to the disgusting thing, again, just say no. This is what Nigel Farage did. Ironically, going on Have I Got News For You and having that fruitcake versus loony game that they did, and it turns out that Nigel Farage actually found out a lot of, UKIP MPs were being a bit mad. And he said, oh, well, if that's true, it's disgusting. I'll look into it straight away. And look where UKIP got. It got us a referendum that they won. And now look where he is now. 30% in the polls and flying. This is not the way. I'm afraid to say, Homeland, optics do matter, and this is not good optics management. You've got to learn from mistakes, not keep making them over and over.
There'll be a lot of people who will think that a lot of these posts contradict your code of conduct.
You point out how to me where I mean that breaches their code of conduct.
I think
there's no racial slurs or threats of violence or anything like that.
I think suggesting that children who aren't white is disgusting.
No, I think the disgust comes from the fact that there are schools and classes in England where there are no English people.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Doesn't come across that way though, does it? Which is all that matters. A problem Kenny doesn't seem to get here is that people can't read this particular ex-poster's mind, and we're in a world full of people that are willing to not give you any charity whatsoever. So yeah, you've got to be careful with what you say. That is absolutely, completely uncontroversial to say. You don't change that attitude by effectively forcing your way through with a few thousand people. Well, not even a few thousand, about 1,000 people. It's not how it works.
Do you think that's
where remigration? Yes, I do. I think that's where remigration will help this country. It'll restore English society and English people to English classrooms.
I do find it quite odd he's focusing on English here rather than British. I guess because it is a bigger problem in England, and it's absolutely an issue that I've seen normies come up with. But even normies tailor the message to not make them sound racist. It's always the main thing I've seen them point out actually is the names. It's not like when I was at school there'd always be a John, an Oliver, Sophie or whatever, and nowadays it's, they basically say it's names they can't pronounce. And it's because that's a lot more socially acceptable than going on about the immutable characteristics, which is, obviously their skin colour and things like that, or their genetics. People are really put off talking about it, and I think it's understated by Homeland how disgusted people are to talk about things like that, and I think it's important to bear in mind.
A lot of people will think that what you've just said, it is discriminatory based on race.
There is no discrimination or racism that I said there. That I have a preference for English people having majority in English schools. I think that you'll find that there are many, many people in England who actually want that.
Yeah, probably. But the problem is with the Homeland parties that their definition for English and the general public's definition for English don't exactly get along. Your average Brit will think of English as, literally it would include Rishi Sunak, and I do mean that, despite the name thing, oddly enough. But the reason it would include that is because I can't remember off the top of my head which school he went to, but he went to, yes, a majority English school, and picked up mannerisms and habits, and to some level his own subconscious picked up what it is to be English. And this is why, on St. George's Day he said he's proud to be English and things like that. The problem with the Homeland Party is that they're not very good at hiding the mask, and they would probably want Rishi Sunak remigrated. And This is where the whole issue with the discrimination based on race comes in. They can't hide it very well. And I'm not going to lie to you, that's pretty much all the Times is saying here. This is a really bad advert for the Homeland Party, and I don't think they realise that.
Since the person made that post on X, it appears they've left Homeland, as the party claims the individual has been advocating for a more hardline approach they don't support.
Amazingly, they're not even talking about Steve Laws there, but I love it. Near the start of this video, they don't go hard enough for these people in reform and what have you, so we'll make our own party. Oh god, that's too far as well. Jeez. Come on, let's not go nuts. Let's go closer to the reform policy, which is pretty much what they're going to end up having to do. Because it's probably about as far as you can get without getting struck under equality law.
It also appears that several of the other X accounts of posts mentioned in this video have been deleted since this report was filmed.
Well, it's too late now. It's on Times Radio forever. And, I've got my own screenshots from doing previous videos on Homeland that don't put them in a generally good light. But yeah, if you've had to end up mass deleting an awful lot of your members' tweets, it's not a great look.
How much is remigration going to cost if you have to replace a fifth of the workforce? And secondly, how much time is it going to take for you to train up white British individuals to take over those roles, and how much is that also going to cost?
Genuinely quite a clever question, if you ask me. Yeah, we've kind of got ourselves stuck in a bit of a situation here where we do have an awful lot of migrants in the workforce, and I don't just mean Deliveroo driver workforce. I think it's 1 in 5 in the care sector's a foreign worker, and explicitly saying, oh, you're going to replace them with white Brits is almost a subtle but underhanded way to make it clear the point here is, putting it along racial ethnic lines, which Homeland obviously are not against, but with all the ways Kenny's tried to claim, we're well within the code of conduct and the equality law, it's actually kind of undermining it right here. Because equality law states you literally cannot discriminate when it comes to who you choose for training and things like that. I mean, technically it kind of does, because it has been the reason that an awful lot of companies have brought in racial quotas, including the BBC, things like that. So doing it the other way for white people, obviously never allowed because we're still a majority. And so Kenny's answering this in earnest, and he didn't see anything wrong with the question, but a subtle trap was laid there, and he either missed it or didn't care.
Not very long. So in terms of costs, if we do away with housing immigrants, giving them benefits, all the effort that goes into supporting that network, if we end all these DI initiatives and these things that put their people first, there will be absolutely billions for us to help remigrate.
Oh, God, he's not even answering the question. Oh, there's loads of money for us to remigrate. Okay, that wasn't the question. The question was, how do you replace the workforce with the 1 in 5 foreign workers in the care sector, for example? What's your plan for that? And where does your billions figure come from? This is not going to butter any parsnips, I can tell you that.
I don't know. They hide the costs from us all the time.
Okay, well, I can see why Pete North was saying that they don't have a serious remigration policy at the moment. This isn't great. I don't know any details here. And also, hiding the costs. The way they hide the costs is by putting it in the other category. The public spending bill is always fairly accurate. The problem you have is that that other section can be migrant hotels, or that might be hidden within the details of foreign aid. You just have to find these things, but they are possible to find. They just make it difficult, but it's not hidden necessarily. I guess it is insofar as they're not explicit with it, but what do you expect? I basically don't find that a decent excuse.
No, I think we do have the costs, actually.
You don't have the costs.
In terms of
the money spent across all the different sectors, remigration is absolutely easily affordable. So
that's the last bit I'm going through this interview. I think I've covered enough. That doesn't even come close to explaining where the money's going to come from or how they're going to pay for it. It's just going to be asserted. It might not even necessarily be wrong, but it's not good enough for me. I need way more details than just stop all foreigners on benefits and therefore we will have all the money we need to remigrate. Could very well be true. I need way more detail than this, and I want to know exactly what's going to happen when you overnight take off all the benefits from, I don't know, the social housing of, is it Somalians in London, I think it is? A high number of them in social housing. What are you going to do about them being homeless and possibly rioting? Because that's going to be an added cost to that. But, I guess you don't have any plans for that.
In order for people to take you seriously as a political party, they will want to know the costing and funding behind all of your policies. But you can't provide me with an actual figure right now.
Joe, we have got 1,300 members. We have got 12 town and parish councillors. We are in the very beginning of a journey. We aren't even contesting parliamentary seats. What you're asking for is absolutely ridiculous. It's nonsense.
I mean, yeah, sure, but it's very difficult to call yourself a serious party when you have 1,300 members and a few town and parish councillors, which, by the way, town and parish councillors, they are not even voted in on the basis of political party. The way town and parish councils work is on your ballot paper, you have a name, and then they'll have a description underneath. There's no little picture of the little castle of the Homeland logo or anything like that. It'll just say Homeland, maybe with a tagline. You know, some people will be Lib Dems, they'll say Lib Dem, etc., etc., etc. But it's not a party-based election. That is your county councils, your metropolitan councils, your mayors and what have you. So while they may very well be Homeland members, and you've got 12 of them in these councils, another thing you've got to realise is that largely, especially parish councils, they largely go uncontested because not enough people go in to become a candidate there. And then to say we're not even fielding parliamentary candidates, I've said this before. How can you call yourself a serious party? How can you have this national platform with national policy and you're not even bothering to try and get into parliamentary seats where the national power is? Like, fine, it might take time to build that up, but every time it's been asked, they have no plans for it. You have to plan further ahead than this. Come on. These are the people that say that, you know, the country, they agree with Rupert Lowe, the country's going to self-immolate in 5 years. If you thought that was actually the case, you wouldn't be saying, yeah, we're not even going to bother fielding parliamentary candidates next election. That's just ridiculous.
You're a relatively small party, as you just said, 1,300 members. If you don't gain momentum, if you don't grow, what's going to happen to remigration for you? What are you
Homeland party is inevitable, remigration is inevitable.
Oh, forget this. I can't be bothered going through any more of your platitudes anymore. Let's just say the tagline over and over. There's no point getting into detail on this anymore. He's not going to go anywhere. I was just interested more, in fact, to see what sort of questions the Times had. And largely, they're questions not too far off what I expected, and quite similar to questions I've had for them over the past few months anyway. And as far as I can tell, they've not improved on any of them. Honestly, I can't see them going the way of Reform and getting 30% in the polls. I can't see them ever having popular electoral success. The times they do get into votes, you know, it was 250 odd in the local elections. They also had a couple of... Oh God, there was an example of a town council where they were trying to say they got 15% of the vote. In fact, I'm going to find this. So some Homelander on X was trying to claim, oh, we got 15% actually in an election. I decided to look into it. This result was nowhere near 15%. The Homeland guy got a grand total of 254 votes out of something like 5,000 there. That's a few percent? I can't even bother to work it out, it's so low. It's nowhere near 15%. Saying 60 short of getting a seat as well, this Mike Linton guy. He was trying to make out he came like second or maybe fourth in a county council election. No, he came 13th out of 14 with 12 available seats on this town council. Again, not even party affiliated elections, these, and they still struggle to get in. I don't know what more examples you need of your vast unpopularity. Homeland is inevitable. What an embarrassment. Let's finish this up.
I feel like I've struggled to get a really clear image of what the Homeland Party is actually like. We're very heavily monitored. What I also learned was that not just Kenny Smith, but a lot of people at the Homeland Party genuinely believe that the Great Replacement theory is not a conspiracy. They believe that to be true.
Yeah, this is why you've got to be very careful with your words. The biggest issue with the Great Replacement conspiracy theory is the Jew part, is the fact it's done by some globalists, some Jews, whatever, to effectively ruin our demographics. No, I've obviously never believed that, but even if you do believe it, why would you keep saying it? It's not got anywhere. I've seen you try and push this for, God, years now. I'm talking nearly a decade. It's not got anywhere. And all it allows people to do is make you out to be cranks, as this entire video has managed to do. And it's probably because you are full of cranks. Even Pete North had to say they were full of cranks and fundamentally unserious people. Wow, it's like Haryan was right again.
There was a lot of people there who felt extremely disenfranchised with mainstream politics. They feel like they've been let down by government after government. But also there was a lot of distrust within the news. These people didn't really trust us as well. But the difference here is that this is something that we're seeing across the whole of the UK. There is growing concerns about immigration. It's why we're seeing the rise of parties like Reform UK, for example. But the question that still remains for me is how people who have those fears are jumping to remigration as being the solution.
Yeah, and you're still not even sure what that entirely means. In fact, the way she has phrased it there, remigration is the solution, is the outlook of Homeland Party members, is effectively get rid of all non-whites. That's why she sounds worried there. And if I were her, I wouldn't worry anyway. Why? Well, for a start, let's go through the Nigel Farage bit here.
This radio, Nigel Farage has been investigating an organisation called the Homeland Party in conjunction with the Times, which has said that it wants to solve mass migration with remigration. We all know what that means. Now,
So a couple of things. One, excellent reaction image. Yep, Homeland Party, who? Largely people's reaction. I've not even brought the Homeland Party up in real life because people will be like, what the hell are you talking about, Haryan? And then the next thing, oh, they want remigration. I'm sure we all know what that means. The public consciousness effectively says remigration means getting rid of all non-white people. And there's going to be a lot of Homelanders saying, yeah, well, that sounds based. Is it any wonder why, then, as Kenny Smith said before, Farage got rid of people for saying remigration, why it's very much against party lines? One, I don't even think they're, particularly racist, and I don't think they want to base the immigration and social policy on things like race and ethnicity, and I don't even think Rupert Lowe wants to do it either. But Rupert Lowe, thanks largely in part to this particular interview, he's oddly enough going to get smeared with the same brush as the Homelanders, because an awful lot of the Homelanders are fans of his. How that femboy who got kicked out a month ago, he got famous for having a big Homeland sign. I don't think it was a Homeland sign. He was part of the Homeland Party with a big sign saying no to reform and justice for Lowe. Like, when people think of Lowe and his ilk, so to speak, that is generally what people are going to think of eventually, because they're just so loud and obnoxious. And as is evidenced by this interview as well, and how Nigel Farage reacts, and how, well, frankly, I think if I said the word remigration to people, they would largely have this outlook on things. And we can say that it's in the Rivers of Blood speech all we want. I'm not actually sure if the word remigration's in it, but whether it is or it isn't, it doesn't matter. The language has changed over the past 60 years, and you have to deal with it. And the way Homeland are dealing with it is effectively ignoring normal people. You're not going to get normal people on board by ignoring them or their concerns.
colleagues have spoken to individuals who...
By the way, I've never heard of them.
No, I know. I'm not saying you did, but I'm just putting it to you. And
this will be put to him, by the way, on request of the woman journalist who has done the rest of this documentary. This will be at her request. And so the funny thing is, Nigel Farage finds this so outlandish because, one, he's basically saying, why are you asking me about this fringe party? You're with the Times. I've never even heard of them, which I completely understand if he hasn't, because I think this is going to surprise some people. I don't think Nigel Farage runs his own Twitter account, and I highly doubt there are people reporting back to him with what's in the reply saying remigration is inevitable and this weird green-coloured castle logo that appears everywhere. I don't think they care. He's got way more important things to think about than a party that's got just over 1,000 members and isn't even putting MPs out there. He doesn't even care. And it's amazing how deluded a lot of Homelanders are, thinking that, oh, he does really care, he's just coping here. No, he doesn't. The only reason I'm covering this is because I was interested to see what the Times had to say. I don't care what Kenny has to say. I don't care about your membership. You're no one. You're not going to get anywhere, and you imploded over a femboy. It's hilarious.
They claim they've left your party, Reform, to join Homeland because of your fault.
Good.
Especially with the setup for this being, there's a lot of people in the Homeland who like remigration. Oh, right, okay. Oh, a lot of them are fans of Rupert Lowe, and they've left your party to go there as well. Oh, good. I don't want the remigrationists here. We want to be normal. This is gold dust to Farage. This is why he's smiling, by the way. Oh, they're solving my problem for me. I'm always worried about people I have to vet. I'm always worried about people going too far to the right. Well, it turns out there's now a lightning rod for them to go to. Great. Which is what I've been saying as well.
Because of Rupert Lowe.
Great. Fantastic. Do you know what?
I'm not having a tougher stance on immigration.
I'm going to go and buy a beer now.
Total celebration mode. This is the best news Nigel Farage probably heard all day. Oh, this Rupert Lowe thing's happening and a load of weirdos are leaving the party over it. Great. Less risk that we'll have councillors who are weirdos then. Again, specifically over the remigration thing. Homeland with the remigration thing. That's what I mean. Not that people who are on Lowe's side are weirdos. I don't necessarily think that's true. That, on top of going on about remigration, that is where the weirdos are. That's what I'm saying. I want to make that clear, because I'm not saying people who are fans of Lowe in my audience are weirdos. I'm not saying that at all. I know a lot of you are on Lowe's side and actively avoiding Homeland because your idea of what remigration actually is is a lot more sensible. Unfortunately, it's not how most people are going to see it, but there you go. You can give up words. It's quite easy to do, actually.
Our stance on illegal immigration is fair, reasonable, what most countries in the world do, and what we used to do until about 2010. Nothing that we do is based on loathing or hatred of other groups of people, and that's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, huge. And I mean, it's quite funny because he brings up the until what we did until about 2010 thing. The funny thing about that is I don't even think he really cares about proper policy, but there's obviously, for some reason, the online right, especially AA, thinks that he came up with this, but there's this whole idea of based Blair. The thing is that Blair was actually better on immigration than the Tories. That just goes without a doubt these days. And all he's really saying here is, you remember things being good back in 2010? You know, there wasn't as big an issue with migration back then as there is now. That's what we want to head back to. Like, it might not be good enough for a lot of people. I'd have to look into the details to know if it's good enough for me. But, you know, politics is mostly vibes. The vibes of the 2010s, before everyone was talking about mass migration, that seems good. And again, we're talking mostly about illegals here anyway. And it is true, Tony Blair did deport an awful lot of illegals. Obama did as well. And it's quite funny to invoke these left-wing figures as I'm going to do what they're going to do. Because a lot of right-wingers are like, oh, yeah, great, they're going to deport a load of people. And the left-wingers are going to say, oh, I remember him. Oh, did he really do that? Oh, I guess Farage isn't that bad. It's classic vibes-based politics and triangulation. And yet the far right, they'll just keep going and going and going right. And it will never stop, and they'll never get anywhere, as they never do, because people still think Nazis are bad, and probably will for a few more generations. You know, it's still not history in people's minds, amazingly. And I'm talking even people my age who are in their 20s.
You're happy if they trot off to Homeland Party?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm on Farage's side. I'm glad Homeland are not on my side. I'm glad that they're out here being open and calling me a Jew, among other names, and trying to tell me their absolutely absurd positions. It keeps me in the mind that I'm in the right place politically, so thank you for that. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Wow, it's been a while since I've done one that's feature length, isn't it? Right, let's get the shilling out of the way quickly. Tonight, we have Tosh Talks. Who knows, by the time this is uploaded, I'll probably already be streaming. Thursday, it's Subnautica. And then, of course, it's Laughing at the Guardian in 2 weeks, so I don't know why I brought that up. Videos out as and when I can make them. Then, of course, if you enjoy what I do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Great ways to help out the channel. Even better ways that I really do appreciate as well is to become a channel member, leave super chats, super thanks. Thank you to everyone who donates. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.